Hello. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for coming. Thanks to everyone who's joining us online. Hello. My name's Fiona. I am the V&A Parasol Foundation Curator of Women in Photography here at the V&A. It's a relatively new role, which seeks to address the gender imbalance in our programme and in our collection, and sits within the wider photography team and our new photography centre, which opened last spring. It's with great pleasure that I welcome you to today's Symposium for Shining Lights. We are here to celebrate this incredible book, edited by Joy Gregory and Taos Damani, and co-published, and co-published by Mac and Autograph APB in January this year. This symposium is produced in partnership with the V&A Parasol Foundation Women in Photography Project, Fast Forward Women in Photography at the University for the Creative Arts, and the Paul Mellon Centre for British Studies in Art. So huge thanks to them for their support, and thank you to you all for coming. I'm not going to speak for too long, just some very exciting housekeeping. There are some toilets out the door to the left. If the fire alarm sounds, we will exit the same route that you came in, so either down the stairs and out through the Blavatnik entrance. And you've got several comfort breaks that have been organised within the schedule, and our chairs are going to introduce each of the speakers, so I'm not going to do that, but I am going to hand over to the marvellous Joy Gregory, and say that Joy is a British photographer of Jamaican heritage, studied at Manchester Polytechnic and the RCA, where she graduated with an MA in photography. Her practice is concerned with the social and political issues, often making particular reference to histories and cultural differences which characterise contemporary society. In 2002, she received the Nestor Fellowship, which enabled her time and freedom to research a major piece around language endangerment. This marked a more ambitious development in her engagement with uncovering the overlooked histories in both her work and her practice. She's a renowned educator of 30 years with a wide range of experience from formal community and elementary school to higher education. She's exhibited all over the world and shown in many biennials and festivals, and is the recipient of numerous awards. Her work's in many collections, including the Government Arts Collection, the Institute of Modern Art in Brisbane, Yale British Art Collection, and of course here at the V&A. She's an honorary professor at Norwich University of the Arts and the winner of the 2003 Freelance Award with a planned exhibition at the Whitechapel Gallery in autumn 2025. So, I'm going to hand over to Joy. Oh, there you are.
Thank you, Fiona. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Welcome, obviously. I think my slides are going to go round and round in circles, so you'll see the beginning slide several times. It's just that I can't speak and do two things at once efficiently. Yes, I just want to also welcome all the people online to this. I mean, I think it's a very significant occasion. When I was making work, when I started making work, there was nothing like this around. I didn't even know there were other people that were making work at the same time as me. I think there was one person on my course in Manchester, Sandra Das, who was the only person of colour that I knew that was doing photography at that time. So I'm really, really glad to be here and glad that the book is here with us. To begin, I would also like to thank the Paul Mellon Centre for Studies in British Art, V&A Parasol Foundation Women in Photography Programme, Fast Forward Women in Photography, University of the Creative Arts, Mac Books, Autograph Association of Black Photographers, and also very special thanks to someone who was really a huge part of this journey, and that is Taos Damani. And I know that a lot of you actually worked with her and had long conversations with her, because, I mean, I'll explain about how this book actually came together and why it had to work in the way that it actually did. And most importantly, I wanted to thank all the authors and contributors to Shining Lights, because you were the ones that actually made it possible, because it wasn't possible at all without you. So the origins of the book, I mean, it began really sprang from a talk called Shining Lights at Autograph. And I, in my normal, but I'm not particularly slapdash, but I sort of like always doing things at the last minute. I just thought, well, I want to do this talk about Maxine's work, and so therefore I will frame it with the work of the people that were around and working with us at that time. And I thought that's going to be very easy. So I think I gave myself like a week to gather everything together. And wow, there was no images. Literally, there were no images, or there were very few images. I went to, and also because I work at the University of the Arts, I have access to lots of collections and also lots of libraries. And if I couldn't find anything, because I knew where to look, having actually put things into Chelsea back in the 80s and the 90s, and knew about Innova and knew about Autograph and but it was really difficult to actually, not just find the images, but also the ephemera. There was actually quite a lot of ephemera, and I panicked a bit, sort of like, what am I going to talk about, because I've got no pictures to show. So I can show the ephemera, and luckily that evening, Maxine was there, and she joined me on stage, and there are some people here today who were also in the audience there, who actually became part of the panel, in a sense, because we reminisced really about that time. And I think that was when the seed was planted about doing a book, because I've taught for over 30 years, and I just assumed somebody else would have done it. Why wouldn't I? I'm not a writer, I'm an artist that takes pictures. And then I also recalled many, many years ago, in 1986, when I met this fabulous woman called Araba Mercer. And I met Araba Mercer at a party which I really didn't want to go to. It turned out that my next door neighbour had a cousin who was in love with a woman that was going to this party, and she couldn't possibly go on her own, and so she had to come with an entourage. And so I was recruited into the entourage, and I also got a lot of photographs out of this party, because the person who owned the house was somebody called Nod, who had this spectacular house which had lots of different objects from the 1930s and 1920s and 50s all over the wall. It was incredible. So I ended up going back there to re-photograph her house. But at this party, I ended up speaking to Araba for hours and hours and hours. And then I bumped into her near my house, my home in London on the Wandsworth Road. And it turned out that she'd moved down from Manchester and lived round the corner. So we just spent ages and ages chatting and gossiping and catching up and talking about what we were doing. And at that time, I think that there was lots of crossover between things. And Araba had just got this job at Sheba, which some people will remember, Sheba Publishing. And she said, let's do a book on women's photography. And I said, yes, let's do a book on women's photography. So we ran off and persuaded Sue O'Sullivan that it was a really, really good idea. But in the end, it couldn't really happen. I'd collected all this work, and we could only have 1 or 2 photographs, because it's so expensive to produce plates at that time. I know it's probably hard to imagine, but that's how it was. So I think after I did the talk, and I realised that if nobody else is going to do the book, then maybe I should do it. And I still had contacts with people, and also I had Facebook. So if I didn't know them, then we could contact them through Facebook. And I managed to get, so the people who really helped this really come together were obviously Autograph and Mac Books, who actually had faith in it. But it started off as being a very modest idea of just doing I suppose just doing a catalogue around the talk that I did with, can people not see me? Oh, okay. So doing just a very modest publication around the talk. And we got this fabulous person who came in to work on the research, which was Taos, who helped to actually shape this book into something much more ambitious, because we wanted more and more people. Because for me, what was really important was not just having, just having 2 or 3 people that might be mentioned, but it was about the whole environment at that time, the ecology. it was about bringing to life those erased histories and absent voices. And it was also about, for me, the centre of the book was about people telling their stories in their own voices. So for us to tell our stories in our own voices, because I'm so used to have people speaking for me. And I think all of the people in that community are exactly the same. Like, this is how you feel, this is what you think, this is, like, no, I don't think that. Sometimes I'm too polite to say that, but hey, who am I? And I suppose there were things that did exist, so like Polarize, which some people know, our Women's Artists Library, which, the women of colour section of that is only there because of Rita Keegan at that particular moment thinking this is really important. The rest of it, I was probably thinking, move on to the next project, not thinking about what went before. And of course, Innova and Autograph and 10/8 magazine. Producing the work, or producing the book, had to be done with immense care. And care, I think, is the thing that's centre to all of this. The care was about spending time speaking with people, listening, most of all, really, really listening, because so many people had met with disappointment, constant disappointment, lies, assumptions, and things that never ever materialised. And I suppose for me, it didn't matter how long it took, but the book had to come out. It had to come out. And I have to actually thank Mark Seeley for this because there's always deadlines. And Mark very wisely said, it's been 40 years. What happens is not the deadlines, that it actually comes out and it's the right publication. It has to be right because you can't redo it. It's done, and it's done once, and it's out there. There were voices that said, you'll be lucky to find more than 3 people that are worth publishing. I was there, I know that that's not true, and I'm not even going to listen to those sort of things. Because for me, it was never, ever about hierarchies. The whole time of that period was never about hierarchies because it was all about helping each other. It was about an ecology. And we were all part of that ecology, which has actually created a whole. And I think it's probably the same today. I think at that particular time, because it was all about in person, there was no internet, there was no, Instagram, there was no anything like that. So you met people in person, and you built these very long and strong relationships, which are really the reason that the book was able to be what it is not just those relationships through me, but through people who knew people who knew people who knew people. And that was really, really important. And it was also important to acknowledge that, the collaboration and the mutual support, which was central to that whole thing. And because of that mutual support and because of that ecology, that is what enabled so many of us to survive. And I talk about survive not just as photographers and maybe not as photographers, but to move into other fields and to do different things, but actually to survive the difficulty of being that thing. But it also enabled some of us to thrive. And for that, I'm truly thankful to all of those people that enabled me to be where I am today, because it wasn't about me being this or that. It was about a whole community, and it is about that whole community. I don't know how much time have I got. There's 3 minutes left or something. But I'll be very quick now. The structure of the book, which keeps coming up a little bit, it's about the authentic voices. So there's a series of round tables, and the round tables look at different things that were really important at the time. So one of the round tables outside the tent, contextualizing Black in the 1980s and 1990s, because people talk about, nobody will know what we're talking about outside the tent. Anybody who's outside the tent knows exactly what it is to be outside the tent. You're not part of the conversation. You're not worthy of the conversation. You're not worthy of speaking to. The womanism, Black feminism, what, which, where, why, how. And also reflections from the new generation, because I think And the way in which this symposium has been constructed is about having cross-generational voices talking across those decades, and thinking about those different experiences. They're essays from the past and the present, obviously newly commissioned essays, and that helps to give context to the time, but also make the connection between then and now. And also, I mean, the way in which I talk about the book, to think about the book, I mean, like, I am a photographer, and I'm sort of like honed in that thing, trained in that thing. And I was so used to all photography being pigeonholed. It's like, is it landscape photography? Is it portrait photography? Is it, documentary photography? What sort of photography is it? And whenever I go to a party and people say, oh, so you're a photographer. What sort of photography do you do? And I'm like, I don't know. And so when all the work came in, it was like, oh, right, so none of it actually fits into anything neatly, or some of it does and some of it doesn't, but there's lots of seepage, and there are some areas that maybe people won't say that they're photography, but they are photography because they're either lens or not lens-based, but they work with light, or, I mean, they're part of that family. And so I set about naming the chapters. So you'll see that there's together, community and activism, which is central to that time, because you think about sort of like, Clause 28, sort of like apartheid, South Africa. I mean, like these are all threads that are running through the book and through people's work. And I think to look at that book and to look at the images and to look at the way in which people have thought about and constructed their work and made their work is an actual. It's a picture of the history of that time. It wasn't intentional, but that's how it is. Journeying home and distant places, about travel photography, it's very different when you travel in a different skin. When you travel in a skin where you have connections to a place where you're traveling to, or even you don't have connections with that place, it means something different when you walk there with a body of colour. It means something totally different, the way in which you're received. I mean, like I remember going to Jamaica with my family for the first time, thinking, oh, no, I'm Jamaican, I'm going to Jamaica. And then it's like, have you seen The English Girl? You think, ooh. But when you're working on projects, so I've been working for a long time in South Africa, in a very small community up in the Kalahari. And when I first went out there, they just assumed, because I was in this body of colour, but I was definitely one of them, and also because of the way in which I looked. And so therefore they used to treat me like an errant child. And I used to say, like, I'm actually a researcher, and they're like, please. So it is very different, that sort of like kinship and family ties, so very expansive, the idea around family and kinship, because it's about being together. So your kin are actually the community, as well as, your family per se. Portraits and likeness, exploring process and materiality. I think there were some images there that people really, really weren't expecting, like very experimental. I knew that stuff was out there, but I mean, like, it was fantastic to be able to have a platform and to explode people's expectations around things like that. Or to portrait authentic selves, sort of like, is this person them or not, or whatever. Beyond the frame, photography and other media, embodied experience around bodies and sexuality, which I think was really important to put that in. And also on assignment, many people earned their living from taking photographs. I mean, especially, I think within sort of like councils and, sort of like charities and things, a lot of that work actually dried up with the end of the GLC. And also now we're in an age where nobody really wants to pay for any content. So if if you're going to make a living as a photographer per se, I think it's going to be quite difficult, but possible. And of course, Tows's essay, which brings in, ties together the threads, bringing everything in from the centre of the page. Portfolios were really important to actually give an in-depth flavour to some of the themes that we explored within the book. And again, it wasn't like a hierarchical thing. So some of the portfolios will be people that are not very well known. Some will be by people that were well known, but it was like a mixture. And then I had an acute embarrassment about sort of like, so Taff was going, I think you should have a portfolio. I was like, no, I shouldn't have a portfolio. And it's like, so I ended up having a portfolio because she persuaded me that I needed to have a portfolio. I wasn't happy about it anyway. So the symposium, so coming back to today, is to pick up on some of those themes in the book, and to expand on some of those issues across generations, rather than sort of like just staying in the past and the idea of it being historical. So the first panel will be on art, community spaces and activism, which is still very prevalent today, and really important today as it was then. I would never have thought of myself as an activist, but I think just by being, and being a woman, you have to be an activist if you want to survive. And this panel explores the role of community spaces in the 80s and 90s, but also looks at things today. And it's also, these spaces are also a sanctuary for very, very sort of marginalised voices, around the world. And they enabled, the success of people like, Sonia and Maud Salter and Labena. But they also set these things up. They were there at the front. So, in order to, if you want something to happen, do it yourself. That's all I can say. Contextualising black feminism. Because black signified a particular identity and alliance related to the colonial past, to our colonial past, which stretches across the world. I always think about when I was at school and they were pointing to the pink bits on the map, and I didn't really quite understand what they were talking about. Now I understand. I grew up with it, but so you understand it, but you don't know what it really is. But and to look at feminism through that lens, I think is really, really important. And that's why that term womanism was actually coined, because I think in the 70s and 80s, maybe feminism didn't actually address some of the issues or ignored the issues that were acute and really important to people of colour and women of colour. The panel 3, which is in this afternoon, is interrogating decolonisation in institutions. And it's looking at how institutions then and now actually work with that work that comes in, but also how they change themselves. Am I late? Quick. Am I on time? I was late. And the neglect. How do you address the neglect of black women photographers or any practitioners of colour, actually? And what do you do about that going forward? And for me, it's really important that it's a conversation, not sort of like, this is what we're going to do. It has to be this. And we have to talk to each other. There also has to be there has to be an address of putting things into collections. And I think about it in terms of education as well. So when I started teaching in 1986 at Stoke-on-Trent, and it was like a fluke. It was an absolute fluke that I got a job. I had a friend who was at the Royal College with me. He had 3 jobs in 3 different parts of the country. So he had a job in Cornwall, he had a job in Stoke-on-Trent, and he had a job in London. And it was I think it was driving him completely bonkers. So he asked me if I would take over Stoke-on-Trent. And because I took over Stoke-on-Trent, when a proper job came up and I applied for it, I actually got a job as a teacher. Many of the people that I was at college with that are of colour or became technicians. And the thing is, within higher education, is you can't actually move between the two. But the other thing that was like a mark of that time was I walked into a space where I was the only woman, like the only woman across the whole of the art school and the whole of the design school that wasn't teaching art history. And it was like, this is so weird, because I'm doing photography and there's people doing film, and there's loads, 50%, always 50% of the people on the course were women, but yet all of the tutors were male. And then, so I don't know what happened. There was like a flicking of a switch about, probably 92, where everybody was given retirement packages to go away. And then suddenly there were loads and loads of women, to the point when I was teaching at LCC, we were going, right, we've got a job coming up, but we have to get a man. There are no men here. So like things can switch very, very quickly. So the last panel is the panel that I will be chairing, which is on changing landscapes, which will be looking at the changes, if there have been any, or discussing changes that might have happened and whether or not we are again reinventing the wheel. So every generation that's come up has said, where are the images? Where are the people? Where are the practitioners? And it's like there has been no evidence of them. And in a sense, so this is the reason I did the book as an educator, was I didn't want to have another generation of people going into university who said, oh, there were no black women photographers practicing. And it was like, well, there were. But so like, where are the pictures? Oh, I don't know. So they get, and I'm hoping that all the universities and all the art colleges and schools and local libraries will actually get the book and have it on their shelves so people can actually look at it and see themselves and their communities reflected in print. Right. So, I'm going to move on to my introduction to Bernardine. Because I'm really, really delighted, like more than delighted, I'm thrilled actually that Bernardine has agreed to be our keynote today. I met Bernardine a very long time ago when I was working on a women's photography festival. But also, I mean, I knew about her, and I knew about her from afar because she, and this is the reason I asked her to be here today, is because she was very much part of the ecology of that time. She was, I suppose, I'm going to say, like she was a muse. She was a collaborator, but she was also, somebody who was really, really part of that. And I know that from people who've spoken to me later saying, oh yeah, I photographed Bernardine, for a poetry book. And if you look at Maud Salter's work, you see Bernardine in that. But I mean, like, and I think I don't know. I think about the the borders between different disciplines at that time, because it was always about meeting in person. Like when you go and sit in a club or a pub, you don't know who you're sitting next to. And so if the reality is, if that's your reality, then obviously there's going to be seepage. You're going to meet people that are doing writing, you're going to meet people that are doing film, you're going to meet people that are doing painting, you're going to meet people that are welders, you're going to meet people that are doing all sorts of different things, carpenters, everyone you're going to meet, if you meet them in person, you haven't got a choice about who you're going to sit next to. I mean, like, when we're doing things on social media, we're actually, we're actually selecting and editing exactly what it is that we want to be next to. And I think it's great. I mean, I feel very privileged to live in a world, or come from a world, where I've actually come from one place into another, and I can seamlessly go in and out of each one. Although I'd have to admit, if I have to write something, like I can't do this, I have to go and write it on a bit of paper and then I type it up. I can't do the thing. It's just like about me not being able to do so many of those things all in one go. So Bernardine Evaristo, many of you will know, is the winner of the 2019 Booker Prize for her 8th book, Girl, Woman, Other, which I have 2 copies. Because I have to have an audio one as well, because I like to have two of everything. And she was the first black woman and black person to actually win that prize. And if you think how long that prize has been going, it's quite shocking, but there are more shocks. And it was #1 on the Sunday Times bestseller list for 5 weeks and for 44 weeks in the top 10. And it's in many, many languages now. She's also the author of essays, journalism, literary criticism, and which includes Mr. Loverman, which we were talking about earlier today, which has been adapted into an 8-part series for the BBC and due to broadcast in the autumn. And I think they put out some teasers last night, from what I understand. And for me, her memoir, Manifesto on Never Giving Up, is an inspiration, because for me, it talks about what is in this book and also the experience that many of us endured. We just lived through it. She's also set up many inclusion programs and for writers, and since 2020 has been the curator of Black Britain writing for Penguin Random House. And I think I remember going to a launch of Bernardine's book at Penguin some time ago. I think it was a blonde, something to do with blood, because I was like blonde at the time. I was very interested. And she's received 80 awards, honours and nominations, including 2 British Book Awards, and she's been the on the UK Black Power list for the last 4 years, and is Professor of Creative Writing at Brunel University in London, an Honorary Fellow of St Anne's College, University of Oxford, and an International Honorary Member of the American Academy of Arts, Sciences, and the President of the Royal Society of Literature. So thank you so much for being here, Bernardine. Thank you. I'm so excited. Thank you. Right, I'll get up.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Joy. You know, I think extemporized speeches are always the best. And that was just a great talk. But I'm going to read. And I have this habit when I write a speech of then, as I'm traveling to wherever I'm going, of scrawling all over it. And then I end up tripping up over what I'm saying. So I hope I don't do too much of that. So I hope this provides some kind of context for this wonderful book. Thank you. Shining Lights, Black Women Photographers in 1980s to 90s Britain is a necessary record and important achievement. Joy Gregory has produced a fantastic book comprising photographs that capture the zeitgeist of this era with accompanying text published contemporaneously and written for this book. There is a lively panoply of essays, reflections, poetry, and in conversations that provide fascinating contextual enhancement. I had never realized the scale, range, and quality of the photographs taken during this period, and it was wonderful to see Black women photographers whose careers continued to develop into the 90s. But I also felt saddened by the fact that so many of these talented women who developed their practice at grassroots level seemed to stop at some point, or at least I can't find their presence online beyond the era. Yet so many of them produce the most stunning, intriguing, and original images, the kind of images that would be exhibited at major galleries today. The art world has been changing and opening up for some time now, and many visual artists of my generation are getting their dues of late, having spent at least 40 years working quietly without receiving the level of attention they deserve. Interestingly, sometimes the acclaim they receive today is for art produced in the 80s, which begs the question, if not then, why now? Well, because society has shifted, that's why. It's become more inclusive and more value is placed on what we create and curate. Recently, in 2023, as you've heard, Joy Gregory herself won the prestigious Freelands Award, which meant that the Whitechapel Gallery will host a retrospective of her career in 2025. And Ingrid Pollard, who took photographs of Theatre of Black Women shows in the early 80s, the company I co-founded, has won the Hasselblad Award, the world's top photography prize, in March of this year. I am constantly surprised and delighted that so many Black women creatives, having spent a lifetime of dedication to their creative practice, are being afforded the value that they deserve. The 80s was an era where there was a unique manifestation of the collective energy of what we are capable of, and it yielded amazing results. It was the era that saw Black women break new ground in the arts without waiting for the institutions to open their doors to us. I'm not saying there were no Black predecessors, photographers, theatre makers, writers, dancers, musicians, but rarely was the focus and leadership on Black women. I know young women today who are similarly carving out a creative space for themselves. Too many to mention, but I will mention a couple. Lynette Linton, artistic director of the Bush Theatre, still in her early 30s, has produced 40 plays at different stages of development, many of them debut scripts by people, many of them women of colour, since taking the helm there in 2019. Or there's the Galdam Collective of women whose online magazine for women and non-binary people of colour flourished for several years. But my impression is that until social media really took off and did the job of connecting people across all kinds of boundaries, Thatcher's legacy of individualism persisted for a long time. And the challenges today are different. How to cook up creative projects in partnership with other people when it feels as if talking to people, as Joy kind of mentioned, face to face in the same physical space is on the way out. But that's another conversation. I don't intend here to shamelessly plug my own writing, but for anyone further interested in researching this subject, my memoir manifesto is a lot of it is about the 80s, but I also wrote a booklet, because it's so tiny, for the Tate Britain Look Again series called Feminism, which is a kind of survey of the black women artists, mainly who emerged in the 1980s. And you can also find a piece on older black women in the arts breaking through today in a Guardian article that was published a couple of years ago. And I wrote an essay called Personal Notes on the Art of the African Diaspora, which was published this year in the British Academy's Journal, which is now online. To conclude, we artists all operate in an ecosystem that works most effectively when we collaborate with an understanding that we need to elevate not only our own careers, but our communities as a raison d'etre rather than as an afterthought. Shining Lights does just this, conceived, collated, and edited by Joy Gregory, a photographer who saw what was missing, understood the importance of the politics of history and decided to change the record and to elevate the narrative of an era, of artists, of a community, however loosely defined, a demographic and an art form. Joy Gregory, I salute you.
Hello, thank you so much, Bernadine and Joy, for the lovely introduction. I just wanted to ask a question about, so in the book, there's obviously a lot of South Asian, some Middle Eastern photographers, as well as Black African diaspora female photographers. I wondered, kind of on the same thread of contextualizing Black in the 80s and 90s, I was born in 1999, so I was kind of raised at a time when Black very much meant the Black African diaspora and recent arrivals to the UK rather than the South Asian and West Asian diaspora. So I wondered if you could maybe elaborate on who is Black, who gets to be in that kind of, I guess, category, and what are the problems, but also the benefits of kind of all grouping us together.
Right. Okay. Right, for me, is this on? Can you hear me? Okay. So for me, it was everybody who was outside of that tent. And it was everyone. So whether or not you would, like today, you'd think, oh, that person isn't Black. And I actually had somebody who's actually in the book who said, well, I'm not Black. And it was like, well, you were then. Because nobody would speak to you if you were different. And it was about being different and not being, like if you were from, I don't know, if you're from Latin America, nobody was that interested. So therefore you became part of that community. Or you didn't become, you were that community. You were there. You were part of it. We all had to work together. And I think the change in that definition has changed because I think the change is because of people looking towards America, and it's very much thinking of Black in a sort of like an American context of being of African descent. It was never that in that period, and it couldn't have been. it was just a very, very different world. I mean, like, you were there.
Yeah, totally. So, like, Theatre Black Women, the women who we work with were Black and Asian women. But, you know, this question is an interesting question because we had these conversations 40 years ago. Anyone who remembers, you know, we used to have these Black women's conferences and then it would be, who's allowed to be here? But it's a term that is constantly evolving. I mean, I quite like the term of colour. And what I find interesting about these labels is that they're accepted for a while, and then often they become insulting. You know, coloured. When I grew up, I was coloured. I was also half caste. By the time I was an adult, both terms were insulting. I'm not that fussed, personally. I kind of go with the flow. But I think absolutely what Joy is saying, that she is writing and producing a book which is about an era where it was inclusive in that way. Perhaps not so inclusive now, although I do have Asian women friends who say that they identify as Black.
Thank you for your question, Joy.
Any more? Come on.
Yes.
I think we're going to address kind of institutional questions later, but I just wondered whether you could say a little bit more about the spaces in which your practice and was welcomed, both of you. And often, I think you were talking about spaces which are outside the sort of mainstream or the kind of national collections or the big spaces, but especially for I'm thinking photography and exhibitions, you know, libraries and spaces where things are a bit more provisional or educational spaces. So I just maybe something, if you could speak a little bit about that kind of the environment. You use the phrase ecosystem quite a bit, and I think that's interesting just to think about the actual physical environments in which community and creativity was fostered and nurtured.
Yeah, I mean, like, it's quite interesting because, you could actually do things in institutions, sort of, but it was always because there was somebody on the inside. And I think here at the V&A, so the reason they have any of my work here at the V&A is because of Mark Hayworth Booth and Rosie, because they both supported people of colour, like, and so, you know, Mark would actually, and women, so Mark would actually, you know, buy pieces. Rosie would buy pieces where she could find pieces and bring them into the collection. Libraries, I mean, like, I remember when I was doing the first Women's Photography Festival, which some people will remember from 1988, Spectrum. Was it Spectrum? Yeah, Spectrum. We had hundreds of exhibitions across London. Most of them were in libraries. I mean, I think at that particular period, it was very, you know, you were very reliant on, you know, community centres, which most of, you know, a lot of those have gone and dried up because the money went. So, you know, councils had budgets for the arts, which they would then make sure they reached other space, you know, other individuals and groups, which wouldn't be funded by government spaces. I mean, like, I just think about photography, like photography in the 1980s, 1990s. So you had somebody at the Tate who said that, like, photography would cross his threshold into any collection over his dead body. so you're a photographer, you're a woman, so nobody actually is really wanting to listen to any women. And then you're of colour. I mean, like, you've got no hope. So it was about individual, and like Barry Lane at the Arts Council, Amanda King at London Arts Board. I mean, like, it is about individuals in those institutions that actually open the door and letting the water seep in. And for me, sort of, I suppose, another idea around that is around apartheid. I mean, apartheid didn't turn over on its own. You had to have people who were inside opening the door to let you in, because there were so many gatekeepers to keep you out anyway.
Yeah, I would say, not talking about photography, but in terms of theatre, which is what I was involved in the 80s, is that we would do shows in libraries, in community centres, in toilets, and alternative theatre venues. So there was a whole culture of alternative theatre venues in the country, and they would be funded by the funders, you know, and eventually when all that money went, not only did the companies go, but also the venues went. But what I find really interesting is that it was tough then, and we were invisible to what we call the mainstream, and the institutions in, I would say, theatre and literature had no interest whatsoever, pretty much in Black women's creativity. But for the young people in the audience, Fast forward to today, you've got so many shows that used to be, you just could not get black shows on in the West End because they would think, well, no, black people don't go to see theatre, and they definitely won't go to the West End. Just in the last few weeks, you've got Slave Play, you've got Death of England, you've got Shifters. Quite recently for Coloured Boys. These are the kinds of shows that would have been touring toilets in the 1980s. Now they're on in the West End, and I go to theatre all the time, and the audiences are diverse. So it's an incredible shift. Or I mentioned The Woman King, or Wakanda Forever. You know, the fact that you have black women who do not fit a certain kind of stereotype of a mixed race ideal. Black women carrying blockbuster Hollywood films, right, is incredible, but it would have been unthinkable in the 1980s, in the 1990s, actually in the 2000s, actually until it's actually happened. So the shift has been enormous, but that's why it's so interesting, so important to know the history, which is why this book is so important, because you need to know how we have reached this point. And of course, many people fell off along the way. But those physical spaces were hostile spaces for, I would say, black women and black men, perhaps a bit less so. We also didn't have a colourblind casting, right? So people will say, well, there were no black people in Victorian England, which is a lie, there were. And they say, so therefore we were not going to cast you in any period drama. Of course, now we have colourblind casting everywhere.
Yeah, that's a huge change that's happened. I mean, like, and I remember sort of like, because there's all these little shifts that happen. So there was a shift within the commercial sector where suddenly it was, you know, important to have, you know, a black artist or a couple of black artists on your book, you know, as on your roster, but they were all men. There were very, very few. I don't think any women that I knew actually got picked up. I mean, like even Sonia. So nobody. I mean, like Sonia's work was in the Tate earlier than anybody I know. But I mean, like she never got picked up, and you just think, what was that all about? And I remember somebody else saying to me, because I was at Gasworks towards the end of the 90s, and people saying well, does Robert pay your rent? It's like, well, no. I mean, like, why do you think that? It's sort of because it's that, like, because you're of colour, you don't really have any agency, and nobody ever expects you to speak back. But it's got me into trouble now and again. So.
Hi. I wondered if you could speak a little bit about the space of the book, possibly as a terrain or territory that aligns or unites the visual language with written language, as these are your spheres to each of you, and maybe as a space of a curatorial space or just the challenges of the book form as a creative form, maybe. Thank you.
Wow. I don't know. You do know that I will never ever write a book again. I mean, like, I wouldn't say that I could write I mean, like, I can write. I mean, I can write more than my name. But it's not a process that I particularly enjoy. But I did enjoy sort of like the putting together of the book and thinking about how to weave the images into text and and also to think about the back and forth of now and then. But for me, I think for each of the chapters, it was about framing that space so that because the most important thing was that it was accessible, because I know from teaching, but also from being around a lot of people, that, you know, like, to get people to actually look at the book and to read the book, and those little short pieces at the front were really, really important to sort of like offer a window, but like something that was very concise and incredibly accessible. So a language that was accessible and inclusive. Because I think all too often people think about, you know, historical books or academic books as being things that are for, you know, people that have lots of knowledge. This book is for everyone because I want everyone to know about that period. Do I have to speak more?
No. I think you answered.
I just wondered, will there ever be an exhibition of some of the images in the book? And the reason why I say that is because I'm an educator, and it's really in a secondary school, and it's really hard to get the kids to read a book, even though we've got loads. And I just think it would be fantastic, as I'm sure everyone agrees.
I know people have talked about doing an exhibition, but I have to, I mean, like at the moment, I'm trying to focus on my work as an artist. I've got the show coming up in October, and I've been working on it for like the last 3 years, and last 2 years, and I still haven't made the piece of work that I'm supposed to make for it. So I think if there is an exhibition, I think it will come from people outside using the book and running with it.
Maybe somebody here will take up this idea.
But there is an exhibition in the book. Oh, brilliant.
Hiya. I wondered if you could talk a little bit more about kind of the research process and the conversations that you had and the sort of gathering days at 198, because I know that, I think you said in a previous occasion that one of your slight frustrations was that you had to like cut down the biographies to be quite concise, and it wasn't able to be maybe as expansive as that whole process was. And then there's a sort of supplement to that. I wondered if you're aware of sort of what it's meant for other participants in the book, particularly those who have maybe been less well known, whether you're aware of like any shows or anything coming out of the interest that the book's generated.
Right, I'm trying to remember what the first bit of the question was.
Research.
Research in the book. Well, I mean, I suppose research as an artist, which is basically talking to people. So the first thing to do was actually to try and contact people. So some people are in my address book. Some people were no longer in my address book because I had an occasion where my emails all completely disappeared. And some people I didn't know. So first of all, we reached out to the people that we knew, or people that I knew, and then also reached out to people on Facebook. I mean, I'm sure some of you saw me sort of like my pleading posts on Facebook. Does anybody know any people that were working in the 1980s and 1990s? I mean, like, it's a face-to-face. It's like original research, actually, a lot of it. Taus did a lot of research of the historical kind and sort of like bringing in different essays and things into it. But for me, it was about those voices, about, sort of like people, or the women actually knowing that their work was important. The work that they produced at that time was important. And it needed, for me, it needed to be seen. We asked, I mean, like at the beginning, I think we were a bit free with like scanning. And that was the other thing. It was really, really interesting. So like when you're doing a book today, people just, without thinking, say, well, ask them to just send in some files. And then some people would say, well, I would know that they would say, you'd say, well, do you have some files? And they'd go, what is a file? What is this? What do you mean? And you're like, the pictures, they need to be, okay, we'll scan them. So I went back to Michael and said, well, we need to set up an account and people need to be able to drop their pictures off. And we were very free because we just thought people would drop off 2 or 3 pictures. People would take loads of pictures in, and we got to the point where we'd actually gone way over budget, and I thought we were going to be sort of like thrown over the bridge or something. So then we could only scan less of the people who came later with their pictures. Some people did have scans. I think people who were working in the mid to late 90s were very familiar with that whole world, but other people weren't, and and I think that's fair enough. And I think that was something we hadn't really thought about. In terms of pictures, it was in images and stories. It was just actually talking to people on the phone. Or meeting people, sometimes a lot of face-to-face, but usually on the phone or on, what do they call that thing? Zoom. Very unfamiliar when we first started. And in terms of your second question about, did you ask about people who? I think I think for the book, for a lot of people who have been totally unrecognised, overlooked, and completely ignored for decades, it was like, this is great. It's great that it's happened. And my terror around the book when we did the launch, I was going to go and hide in the toilet for the whole evening, was like, what if it's wrong? What if someone's really, really upset? Because it was really important that everybody's work was presented well. And that I have to take my hat off to Mac for, because Mac do produce very, very beautiful books. And the journey of making a book, as I've now learned, is can be a bit bumpy. But hats off to Michael, because he never said no to anything. So it was like, we want this, and you could hear him go, and he was like, of course. But I think probably he was a bit terrified of all these women ever turning up on his doorstep with flaming torches. So yeah, and I don't think you should be asking me that question. I think you need to ask the question of the people in the book.
Can I ask you, how long did it take you to?
I thought it would take 3 months, but no, but it didn't, of course. I don't know why I thought it would take 3 months. So I set aside 3 months or 6 months. And then it took, I think Taos came, because I was away in Spain. I think I was in Portugal when we were doing the interviews, because I kept flitting all over the place doing things. And when we interviewed Taos, so Taos started, I think, in January 2022. Mark will correct me if I'm wrong. And I thought we'd be finished in 6 months. Absolutely, everything copyright. But we didn't actually finish until just before 2024, because I was at Yale. So 2023. Yale last year, so it came out in February 2024. So I suppose that's quite fast in some terms, but for me it was like, this is taking forever.
I'd just like to extend the salute to the two women who are very eloquent in describing the 80s. And I just want to say the significance of Black is so important, because as a South African, the political solidarities of the 80s, of the Black experience as not an identity, but as a political solidarity, was very fundamental to expanding the ways in which communities were built across geopolitical divides. So thank you. It's very important.
Thank you for that.
And I think maybe we should end there and have a little break, stretch your legs, and then if we could come back here for 10 past 12 for our first panel chaired by Lola Olufemi. Thank you very much. Thank you to Bernadine, thank you to Joy.